Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hey, Sydney. If you guys, so Andrea's here, but if you guys can turn on, right now it's just everyone's online right now. So if you guys don't mind turning on your cameras, if I know might be still pajama time or whatever, it's 9 o'clock, but
No judgment.
no judgment. Yeah, just so we can kind of engage with everyone. And I'm gonna let Andrea get started. And yeah, we appreciate you being on.
You just want to go on and jump in?
Yeah, if you don't mind. So I can move this camera too if you wanna.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm just gonna roll a cedar down here.
Yeah, or we can do this for right now. So that way. Kind of just,
Are they gonna be able to see the screen?
yeah, it's being shared with them.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm not very tech savvy, so forgive me if you can't hear me or see me.
Yeah, you just tap through, Andrea.
Okay,
So you can literally just hit this button.
okay. All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Can I turn them up? Like this computer?
They're at 100.
Okay.
Maybe it
Sorry,
might be
that's
coming out of
okay.
here, so let me.
The TV?
Can you guys talk for a sec?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yes, but it's just not crazy loud. Um,
Is there like a button on the side of the TV? Let's see, no, maybe it's in the bottom.
sorry, give us one sec. We're just trying to get the volume up. All right, can you guys talk again for a sec?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Can you hear us? That's not.
Maybe it was muted. Well, you go back there, it looked like the X was on there.
Well, I tried to switch to the speakers on this,
Oh.
but we'll just stick with this display
Okay,
audio.
we'll make
So,
it work.
okay. When Jeffrey gets here, he should be here in about 20 minutes. He might know how to do it. He's
Okay,
the tech. I'm sorry.
okay. All right, well, hello, everybody. My name's Andrea Gross. I am with the Gross Group. We have a team in the Harrodsburg area. That's where our office is. I've been with Keller Williams Bluegrass since 2016. So I guess it's going on 8 years. That's how long I've had my real estate license, and I've been with Keller Williams Bluegrass the whole time. So it's been a good experience, and we're happy to be here. If you all don't mind, can you introduce yourselves and just kind of give me your names? And just that way we know kind of who all's on here.
Sure. My name is Sydney Pennington. I've been with Keller Williams since about last January, March, April. Sorry, I had to do a little bit of count back in my head. I was on Malia's team for a little bit, a couple
Okay.
months, but yeah, so I'm still relatively new.
Okay, great. And then who else do we have?
Me, Muhammad.
Okay, so is it just the three of us? And Mohammed, you and I know each other. How long have you been had your real estate license?
So I had it since end of September, and I've been active since mid-October, and I've joined Keller Williams since end of November.
Okay, awesome. Now have you all had closings, or are you kind of working towards that, or where are you
I
at, I
have
guess,
not.
with your business?
0.
I've had 3 closings
Okay.
already.
Okay, great. And Mohammed, you're just getting started, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, we're gonna go over today. The session is over negotiating offers. And I'm a very informal teacher and kind of an informal person all around the boat. So if you have any questions, just chime in, and we'll try to make this interactive and do some, real life scenarios. And I'll try to share some of my experiences to hopefully, give you some real life examples. Anyway, now, have you all done other Ignite classes, or is this the first one?
Yeah, I've
I've
been
been
to all of them.
Okay. And Sydney, you have as well?
Yeah, I've been attending all of them. I only missed one the other day, but yeah, I've been attending.
Okay, great. When I first got started, I don't think they called it Ignite. They had a different name for it, but these classes are really advantageous if you're just getting started, or if you're an experienced agent. It's a good reminder. I always tell people, when you get your real estate license, they do not give you real life scenario education. They kind of teach you how to not get sued. But as far as like teaching you actually how to work with people and how to write contracts, that's more of what you get from your brokerage and leadership, and you kind of have to learn as you go. So that's why these Ignite classes are really beneficial, and it's great that you all are doing them. So today we're supposed to be talking about negotiating offers. So I'm just going to kind of scan through this presentation, and then we can again interact, and you all can ask questions, and we can kind of go from there, and feel free to interrupt me at any time. Okay, so this first page here is just over the course overview. It looks like the past few classes have been on working with buyers and sellers and making and receiving offers. And now we're at the negotiating stage, which negotiating can be really fun, or it can be a challenge, but it's something you have to do as part of real estate. And that gets us one step closer to closing, which is payday, which we all enjoy. All right, today's agenda, we're going to talk about what is negotiation, what the 3 Ps of negotiation are, some tips for negotiating, and then we can just have some discussion and recap over what we have discussed. So this is a quote from Lee Steinberg, who's a sports agent and author. Negotiating is not something avoided or feared. It's an everyday part of life. And that is very true. It's not just in real estate that you negotiate. You have to negotiate really in all relationships and on a daily basis with different types of decision making. There's always an element of negotiation that is involved. So negotiation and the WI4C2TES, I guess that just is a little acronym for all of these things, these titles. So win-win or no deal, you have to have integrity to do the right thing. You always want to keep your customers at the forefront of your mind. So at the end of the day, you're always acting in best interest of your client, whether that be a buyer or hey, I'm doing it via Zoom, buyer or a seller. You gonna hop in here? Okay. Is it gonna bother you if I'm like sitting here on top of the computer? Okay. You always want to have integrity to do obviously the right thing. And then with regards to your customers, as realtors, we have a fiduciary duty to always act what is in a manner that is in their best interest, of course, as long as it falls within moral code and our code of ethics as realtors. But they are our priority and what is best for them, which we always have to keep in mind when we are negotiating. We have to have a commitment in all things. Communication should be sought after first to understand. Communication is really key in negotiation, in my opinion. It's really important throughout the entire real estate transaction, but especially in negotiation, because you are the middleman for your client, and you want to make sure that you communicate the details of the offer and make sure that they understand, and that you're also honestly that you have an open mind and that you can brainstorm ways of helping them to meet their goals and negotiate the current contract. Creativity, ideas before results. Just like I said, sometimes we have to brainstorm ways to be creative. The dollar amount may not be what we expected on the offer. either the offer that we receive or the offer that we are drafting, but there may be some ways that we can make that offer attractive in other facets. Maybe it's a closing time frame, or inspection details, or the type of financing that is utilized. You know, we can improve those items of the offer, and a lot of times people will pay attention to those details more so than the purchase price. If we can't come to terms on a price, we can get creative and make that offer attractive in other ways. Teamwork, together everyone achieves more. So, you know, we're working as a team when we're negotiating. You are on the same team as your client, and at the same time, you're honestly also on the same team as the other agent. You know, a lot of times agents feel like they're working against each other because we're both trying to get what's best for our client, but we both want to close the deal, because that's the only way that realtors get paid, is if you successfully get to closing. So we also want to keep that in mind when we're negotiating, that, hey, you know, we're all after the same goal: buyer, seller, buyer's agent, seller's agent. We all want to get to a successful closing. So you want to keep that in mind when you're communicating with somebody that's on the other side. Trust, it starts with honesty. So I feel like that's very important in our role as a realtor, is our clients have to feel like they can trust us. And a lot of times that begins with just being honest. Now, sometimes the information we have to share and the details we have to communicate are not positive. You know, if a property needs a lot of work and you're representing the seller, and the buyer makes an offer that's $25,000 under list price, and their reasoning for that offer is because, you know, the siding of the house needs to be replaced, and that's a big expense they're going to take on, you know, you need to communicate that in an honest fashion and way to the seller, if that's the justification from the buyer for that lower offer. And if you have that level of trust with your client, from being honest and upfront from the beginning, that relationship's going to be that much more stronger. Equity provides opportunities for all, and then success, you get results through people. So these are a lot of the elements to you know, successful negotiation when you're working on a deal. Now, the path to negotiation. This seems probably pretty obvious, you know, when you're working on an offer. You know, it's either going to get accepted, rejected, or countered. But this is kind of viewing it on paper. So option one, there are actually two options when an offer is presented, whether you're the realtor that's presenting the offer or the realtor that is receiving the offer and then presenting it to your sellers. Option one is you get an offer, it's accepted, and you work towards closing. That's the option we all love, because that makes it very easy on us. And a few years ago, when the market was so strong and things were selling, you know, in a matter of hours, over list price, as is cash, a lot of times that is how, that's the type of option that was the path to negotiation. But now that the market has shifted and is different, you are more commonly seeing option two as your path to negotiation, which option two is the offer is made. It is either rejected, meaning the seller say, no, we're not even going to give you a counter. It's just a no. That would be a rejection. Or they end up counter offering, which means they change some element of the offer and respond back to the buyers. Once that is done, that is when the negotiation comes into play. So in that counter offer, they have changed some element of the offer. It can be several elements, or it can be one element. A lot of times it is the price. Other times it can be the price and the closing timeline, or the inspections period, or the contingency. They don't want a contingency to sell a home, or maybe they are okay with a contingency to sell a home, but they want a 48-hour kickout clause added onto that offer. Those are all aspects of the negotiation. Once the offer is negotiated and sent back to the buyer, then they are either going to accept or reject. If they accept, then we've got a deal. We're working towards a closing. If they reject, they can just walk away and the deal is killed. A lot of times they will counter back, meaning we'll go back to revisit that negotiation again. And that is when those conversations with your clients and the conversations with the other agent are really important, because you want to identify, expectations from the other side of the deal, but you also want to be sure that you understand the expectations of your client. Do you all have any questions over those two paths for an offer? No?
No.
I don't have a question. I just had something to add real quick while we're
Sure.
going through it. Something to remember there is a lot of times when we get into that countering and exceptions and rejections and this kind of stuff, it's easy to get into that personal spiral of really only looking at the finances of it. Remember that that's not always the only thing that it matters to our buyers or our sellers, right? Oftentimes the number can stay absolutely the same, and it's as little as changing the closing date. It's as little as really looking and getting creative outside the box, right? So it matters what's important to them, end of the day. So like right now, I have a buyer that I am personally working with, and we have placed a couple of offers and they have not gotten accepted. Well, it's because to her, the closing date is the most important thing, and it needs to be the end of March. And for people that in our market anyway, that's very far out, or it feels very far out to them, and they're not willing to take that on. So it's a conversation that I'm having with the customer about. She's like, but I don't understand why my offers aren't getting accepted. I'm placing full price offers. Well, it is the terms and conditions of the contract that are just as important as the actual value that's placed upon it, right? So if for some reason you find yourself in that horrible vortex circle of placing offers and they keep getting rejected, go back and look real close at those offers and go, what was important to the seller? Did we ask that question before we wrote the offer? Nothing says that we can't pick up the phone and call the listing agent and go, what's important to your seller? Ask
Yeah,
the
I have a
question.
lot of agents that do that, because we're kind of more listing heavy. A lot of times they'll reach out and they'll say, what's important to your seller? What do they need to close in a certain amount of time? Or do they want it to be, seamless, or, are they wanting really to sell as is and not wanting to make any repairs? That's a great point. There's a lot of different aspects that you can negotiate on. It doesn't always have to be the price point.
Right. And I know, at least in my market a few years ago, when we were doing the multiple offer situations and this kind of stuff, I had a lot of buyers that just were like, I'm going to get out of the market. It's too hard to get an offer accepted. I don't want to go above and beyond this far above and beyond the price point in order to get an offer accepted. And the end of the day, that wasn't really the case. I had to have a lot of really, could come to Jesus moments with my customers about that's not what's causing, in a lot of cases, your offer to not get accepted. It might be those terms and conditions, even as far as like in terms of the type of financing. Maybe you're choosing to go FHA, but you can do conventional. And if you can, and you're going to get a higher likelihood of your offer getting accepted, let's go that way. Right? So it comes back to having a really great relationship, with your vendor partners, and knowing that you've got really good, strong lines of communication there where you can reach out and have those conversations over and over. But also remember that the other realtor on the other end of the transaction, where we're trying to create that win-win, that person is in this too. Okay. They are your partner and they have the same goal, sold. Okay. So we're not against them in any way. It's really working with them, and how do we make sure that we are creating those win-win circumstances for both the buyer and the seller. And we're not doing that if we're not asking the right questions.
I think that's great. Yeah, can you turn that up a little bit?
I
The volume.
cannot figure out how to.
Oh.
It's on the side.
Okay,
Hey
perfect.
Beth, can you say something for me?
I will probably say more than you'd like me to.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, the volume was down. I could barely hear you all, so they had to come. I told you I wasn't very tech savvy, but they've got it fixed now. Great.
You're okay. No worries.
Okay, any other questions or input before we keep moving on? Okay. This next slide, again, kind of goes back to what Beth was saying. Who do you negotiate with during that transaction? So obviously your clients, but also the agent on the other side. And like she said, we are all after the same goal. We want to get to the closing table, not just the agents, but the clients, the buyer and the seller. The buyer needs a property to purchase and the seller needs to sell their property. So we just have to have those conversations to identify how we can get to the finish line in a manner that will be suitable and acceptable to everyone. And like she said, a lot of times that can be pertaining not just to the price, it may pertain to the closing time frame. I've got some clients right now that are sellers and they are more concerned with being able to close sooner than really the price point because they're relocating for a job. And right now the husband's having to commute 2.5 hours one way every day for his job. And they've got small children. So for them, the closing time frame is probably holds a lot more weight than even the price. They'd be willing to probably take less money to close sooner. So that's something that you don't necessarily want to show all your cards to the other agent, but those are conversations that you can plant seeds and kind of get a feel and let them know, hey, my clients really would like to close sooner than later. Is that something your buyer is able to do? And have those conversations. Okay, some common points of negotiation. Ooh, sorry, I went backwards. Obviously price. It is normally the primary factor, but that kind of goes back to the motivation for selling. I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about, when you're pursuing listings, you need to find the motivated. So who are your motivated sellers? Estate sales, people that are going through a divorce, or people that are relocating for a job, or maybe they have a growing family and they've outgrown their current home and they have to move to find a new one. Those are the people that are motivated to move. And a lot of times, price may not be as much of a primary factor to them as is just getting the deal done. But I would say 8 times out of 10, price is going to be the detail within the offer that is going to be negotiated the most. And the cost of the property, they're directly connected. Number 2 are terms. So what are some, in your all's opinion, what are some different terms within an offer other than the price that can be points of negotiation? Anybody want to comment?
Inspection period.
Inspection period, that's a big one. Especially with the new offer or the new sales contract, that's written differently than the previous offer form. So now we have the due diligence period versus a option 1, option 2, option 3 on the offer to purchase. So yes, that due diligence period is definitely something that can be negotiated. If I'm a seller, I'm not going to like a 21-day due diligence period, because the way that form is written, the buyer can walk away for any reason at all during that due diligence period and get their earnest money back. So if you're trying to make your offer look more competitive, oftentimes a shorter due diligence period is a great way to do that, because that is going to give the seller more confidence that this deal is going to be rolling quicker towards closing. And it gives a shorter amount of time that the buyer can just change their mind and walk away in a shorter amount of time that the seller would have to take their property off the market and market contingent, in which, in most cases, they're going to be losing marketing days when they're marked contingent, because most agents are not going to show a contingent property, unless their client is just in love with it. So definitely a shorter inspection period, that due diligence period. What else do you all think?
Occupancy.
Occupancy, that's a great one. Do you all see a lot of buyers that either request pre-occupancy or are willing to give post-occupancy? What are your all's thoughts?
I've seen more sellers wanting post occupancy,
I agree.
but it can help with a buyer when they find something before they actually need to be there or move from another city. So they want to lock the house down.
I agree completely. Personally, I am not a huge fan of
Not at all.
or post occupancy because it gives a lot of gray area. And I've had some personal experiences where things have happened. It's much cleaner if it's just, possession with deed at closing, give them the keys and then they can swap. But, life happens and a lot of times that's just not realistic, especially if somebody is having to close on a house before they purchase a new home. So what are, in your all's opinion, if that becomes an issue, what are some ways that you can kind of work through that you can get creative instead of just saying, no, we're not doing any type of post occupancy if you're representing the sellers? What are some options that you could negotiate on that to still work towards a successful closing, in your opinion?
Well,
You
if they
might-
want to have occupancy, then maybe they could pay them like rent for the time that they're going to be there. So that might help the buyers. you
Yep,
know?
that's a great idea. We've had some different scenarios where our sellers have given the buyers, let's say, access to the garage only. And they can maybe move some personal items into the garage, say, a day before closing or after the closing disclosure has been issued and we have a set closing day and time. And when we've done that, we've still required the buyers and the sellers to still complete and sign a post occupancy form. We just have it noted on that form that those terms pertain to the garage space only, and that the buyer agrees, they're not going to be living in the property, they're not going to occupy the property, and they go ahead and get those utilities in some scenarios switched over to their name. So, that's kind of a way that you can negotiate with the other side and try to meet in the middle to where it works for everybody. The sellers don't have quite as much liability if they're allowing the buyers to move their stuff into the garage versus allowing them to move in early. Or if it's on the flip side, if the sellers need to maybe move all of their stuff to the garage and leave it there for a couple of days, it's kind of the same
Okay. All right.
mindset.
We also do a lump sum of money just in escrow. So we ask for a secondary escrow deposit of a larger lump sum of money, just to know that we sort of have some skin in the game, right? If that's going to be allowed. I will tell you, it is incredibly rare that we see it down here. And that's just because most insurance companies don't allow it. But the few times that I have seen it happen is because of essentially what they did is they put a large sum of money in escrow and they still paid rent while they were staying there. It would have been cheaper for them in the long run to move into like an Airbnb for a month and then but they didn't want to have to move twice. So that's where we were. So
Yeah, that's a great point. Another thing to consider, just, and again, I'm just thinking out loud, if you're ever in that scenario, is you want to make sure that you communicate very clearly to both whoever your client is, but really both agents need to make sure both clients in the transaction understand, who is responsible if the buyers have moved in early and that air conditioning unit goes out while they're living there, but the property is not closed. They need to have a clear understanding of whose responsibility that is. Same thing if the sellers are living there after closing and they break a window or, the water heater goes out. Everybody needs to, before you make that deal, understand how those types of scenarios will be handled. It's going to be a lot easier on you, the agent, if you have a plan going into that type of scenario versus if it happens and you're like flying by the seat of your pants, trying to explain it in the moment, because that's when the emotions are high. And if they understand completely before they agree to it, it will make everybody's life easier and make it a smoother dealing of that problem if that was to come up. All right, what else do you all think can be negotiated outside of the price on the contract? Any other
the
input?
financing acceptance period. So it doesn't necessarily always behoove the sellers, right? For your loan to not get approved until the day before you close. So, at least when I write a contract, I typically try to allow at least 2 weeks prior to closing that we have an acceptance period. So that way a seller knows that they are securely going to get to a closing table, right? And I'm not saying we're going to necessarily have the complete clear to close at that point, but at least we will have secured the loan completely at that point.
Okay. Are you all seeing in your businesses a lot more contingencies to sell properties than before, as far as like making a contingent offer upon the successful sale closing of an existing property? Or are you all having to
No.
write offers with that contingency? Anybody?
They very rarely get accepted in my market, truthfully. And so because of that, we do try to find ways around not having to write them in that fashion. Just because there are so many people that come, I'm in Florida, so they come here and they can buy it in cash, right?
Yeah.
If they're coming from out of state. So there's not a lot of contingency in terms of that. But what I will say is that I am working with a lot of people who are working to, when they're placing the offers with the sellers, once again, like I said, they're just pushing that close date out further, without it truly being contingent, because it's not necessarily needed to be contingent, and yet they'd be more comfortable if that home sold first. So they're just giving themselves the extra time for that to happen. And we're having a tougher time getting those offers accepted too, because of the longer close date.
Okay. In our business, we have definitely seen an increase in activity of these offers coming in that are, contingent on the buyer's property selling. And we're seeing a lot more use of first right of refusals and kick-out clauses. If you're an agent, let's say I'm representing a buyer and I'm having to write an offer that is contingent upon my buyer's successful sale of their home, what are some things that I can do when I present that offer to the seller's agent to really make my case? Do you all have any ideas? Like really speak to the seller to give them more confidence in our offer with the added contingency.
Good morning, Andrea. It's Crystal Gale. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
It's good to see your face. I don't know. Have you ever taught any of our Ignite classes?
I have not. I am the rookie teacher here.
Oh, honey, it's so good to see your face. And I love hearing your perspective always. You're right. It is commonplace anymore. I just came through one, and our kick out, actually, we have a contingency to sell our property. My folks did over the weekend. And we kicked out one that had a kick out, and now we've got a kick out, but it's a different type of kick out. Ours has more teeth in it, so it's more favorable towards us, and probably having the relationship with the listing agent and the probability of their home selling, because she typically works the market over in Masterson where our listing will be going live. So part of that helped us was the fact that I already had pictures done and we're ready to go. Like, we've hit the coming soon. So that gave her some confidence, in selling it to her people, because we were already further along. We had already done listings, paperwork. So it wasn't like we were just starting to figure this out. My people had been coached well, and it was, that gives a lot of confidence when you're already at that part in the process. So if you are working with a buyer who expresses that they're going to need to sell, you want to go ahead and secure your listing paperwork, start giving staging recommendations, and get the ball rolling with photos lined up so that you can prove that to your listing agent when you're trying to sell their offer so that they can sell it to the sellers.
I agree 100%. If I'm on the listing side and, say we don't have any other offers, but the offer that has a home sale contingency, I'm going to be able to present that offer to my seller with much more confidence if I can say, hey, here is their specific plan. They're going to have it listed on the MLS on Monday. They're going to be priced at $275, which is right in line with the comps of that area. They've already got professional photos done. They understand that they can't take a contingent offer themselves. So they're, going to be aggressive to go after a non-contingent buyer and position themselves to be more attractive. That's going to give the seller much more confidence, and make them feel better about even, taking that offer that's on the table and entertaining the idea of a contingency, versus if the contingency, just reads that it's contingent upon the sale of 123 Main Street. And no, we haven't got it ready. There's some repairs that need to be made. We probably won't be able to get on the market for 3 weeks. And, I'm just going to take some cell phone photos, and they really want to price it on the high side because they don't want to leave any money on the table. That is not making that offer very attractive. So if you're a buyer's agent and you have to write an offer like that, there's a lot of things that you can do on the front end that are proactive, that's going to give your offer a better shot at being accepted and entertained. Now, what if they have to add on a kickout clause? I have had a lot of buyer's agents that bring me an offer that's contingent without a kickout clause, and the buyer doesn't want to do a kickout clause because they don't want to go through the hassle of putting their property on the market, and then they get kicked out, in 2 days. So how would you all deal with that, or address that to still try to work out something between that buyer and your seller, or vice versa, the seller and your buyer, if that's how the clients both feel? They don't want to do a kick out.
Andrea, I lost what the question was because I was getting an incoming call. What was the question?
The question was, what if the buyer does not want to put a kick out clause on their offer? If the buyer is a contingent buyer, they have to sell their property, but they do not feel comfortable putting a kick out on their offer because of their concerns that they'll go through all of the hassle of getting their property ready to sell and on the MLS, just to get potentially kicked out before they've done that. How could you work through that issue?
On one side of it, you're going to put a seller replacement document in place to protect your buyers who will become sellers when they hit the open market. So there's that. I think everything at the end of the day starts with education, and we let them make the decision. And sometimes, unfortunately, they have to feel a little pain of getting not being chosen or being kicked out of something. And it goes without saying. You don't even got to say it. They're like, man, that stings.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes pain is a really good teacher.
Oh, I agree 100%. Especially when it comes from somebody other than the realtor. They just kind of learn from experience. That a lot of time carries more weight. Anybody else have ideas or on ways that you could work through that or combat that? I had a deal, or I have a deal right now on a property that the sellers, they didn't have to sell immediately. They actually can't close for a few months anyways. So they did not want to accept a contingent offer without a kickout clause. But the buyers that made an offer on their house have a property they have to sell, and so they're contingent, and they had not listed it yet, but they didn't want to make an offer with a kickout clause because they didn't want the chance of, like I said, getting kicked out immediately. So the way we were able to meet in the middle is that we went ahead and did a kickout clause on the property, but it was only going to be applicable after a short time period. So the seller was willing to give the buyers a couple of weeks to get their property on the market and to get an offer then. If they did not get an offer during that time frame, then they would go back as active on the market with that kickout clause. So the sellers were willing to do that because they didn't need to close for several months. So they weren't really in a hurry. And they were willing to work with the buyers that way. So that's another example of, trying to work with both parties to see what would be appealing to both sides. Now, normally I would not advise a seller to do that because I don't think it's good when you go list it as, contingent and then back to active. And that's how they ended up agreeing. But the seller was not in a huge hurry to sell. They weren't as motivated. So they were willing to try to give this buyer some time. So that's just another example of ways that you can kind of mold it to fit your circumstance. All right, what about earnest money? That's another element of an offer that can be negotiated. How do you all feel about earnest money and expectations around earnest money?
I
And you
think
have-
it all goes back to education. I mean, you got to let these folks know that in the state of Kentucky, earnest money is not required. But at the end of the day, I always use the analogy. I talk in analogies with buyers and sellers. I think if you can give them a real life example, was there ever a time you saw a used car when you were first starting out and you passed by it and you took it for a test drive, but you didn't have access to the money right away, or you had to get on with your day and go to work? And they say, well, I'll hold it for a deposit. I always give that analogy for them. And then they always say, well, what would you do? Or what do you recommend? And I try and give them a scenario, especially if it's a unicorn. If it's a unicorn, boy, you better come with your A game. I've got 2 that I've preemptively written today for buyer clients of mine that are being shown properties right now. And we try to go double and triple. Some of it is price point based. I mean, $500 is kind of laughable when you're looking at a $500,000 home. I guess it happens, but it's just not advisable. But so some of it is price point driven, and some of it is days on market driven. If it's a unicorn, you've just got to throw everything but the kitchen sink at it. Part of it is that earnest money, and some of that giving it tooth is that it's non-refundable. Now that's very strong, but if you want to make your offer shine and do a non-refundable EMD, that's certainly there. But I always let the client know it's going to be cashed. It's going to be cashed. I had one time, and that was my fault. They said, my check got cashed. And I said, well, yeah, but I should have set the expectation when I was young in real estate. I should have set the expectation that that check's going to get cashed. It will become part of your down payment and be applied to things on closing day.
Okay. Any other comments on earnest money or thoughts on earnest money?
So
How much
I have
power
never
do-
seen a deal yet. And then once again, my market's different. I know that, but I've never seen a deal yet that didn't have an earnest money deposit of some sort. You are allowed to do 0 here in the state, but I've never seen one that doesn't. And I always recommend to my customers that when they're making an earnest money deposit, that if they want it to stand out, your offer to stand out, it needs to cover at least 1 month of what that person's mortgage probably is, to make it worth it to them that they're going to be under contract with you for a month and things could fall out, right? So that they see that you're serious and that you're not, you're not trying to put them in an uncomfortable situation, right? That you're in this and you know that you can help them too if something happens. So that is the recommendation I usually give to my buyers when placing an offer. Now, I always tell them though, the higher the better, the more attention your offer is going to get, particularly if you're in a multiple offer situation. If you're going up against a couple of people for a house, how serious are you? That number shows how serious you are. And yes, you do have to remind them that that money is gone. The money is gone, right? If they accept your offer. So now, once again, our contracts are a little different. Ours, during our inspection period, they decide to back out, they get their escrow deposit back. I'm understanding that's not the case in your state, but in ours, that is the way that it works. If during that inspection period, they decide they don't like the house, they get their escrow deposit back. It's kind of their get out of jail free card during that inspection period.
It's the same on our offers as long as it falls within the due diligence period. So if
Oh.
so your due diligence period, ultimately with this new contract, you can walk away for any reason if you're the buyer and get your earnest money back as long as you fall within that due diligence period. Now, if you're outside of that due diligence period, then you would forfeit that earnest money unless
correct.
you're walking away, due to an appraisal clause or a title issue. There are some certain details where you would still get your earnest money back, but the due diligence verbiage, gives that buyer the ability to still get their earnest money back. So I agree 100%. I think that's a great aspect and avenue of looking at it is the mortgage, the 1 month worth of mortgage payment. We usually recommend at least 1% of the purchase price.
Yeah.
For our clients, and we're presenting offers to our sellers, we always have them pay attention to that because in my opinion, if you're willing to part with that amount of money and you're the buyer, then you're that much more serious, like you said, and you really do
Right.
want the property. So,
Do you like this?
Mhm.
Would you
I mean,
like
you can
this?
typically go into the
You
public
heard me
record
say
and
that
see what
yesterday.
type of a mortgage they have and how many
You're welcome.
months maybe they have left in that mortgage to get an idea of what their monthly mortgage payment might be on the house. And that's typically how I calculate it, right? And I'll look at it and I'll go, all right, so I know for a fact this house is, let's say, a $600,000 house, but I know that they only $1,000 mortgage. So that
Mhm.
means their mortgage payment is likely X. And if it is, let's offer that rather than going in and going, let's throw down the 6 grand if we don't have to and still win.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It's
Yeah.
great input.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions over earnest money or anything we've discussed so far? All right, any other ideas on other ways that you can, other points of negotiation within an offer other than price and some of the other terms we've discussed? What else do you take into consideration? What about the appraisal? I know, like when the market, a couple years ago during COVID, you know, a lot of buyers were willing to cover that appraisal gap if there was one. What are your all's thoughts on that element of adding that point in detail to an offer? Do you think that's a great point of negotiation, or what are you all seeing in your businesses? Any input?
I can give you my personal opinion, but that's about as far as it goes.
Well, that's best.
My personal opinion is that it is absolutely completely up to the buyer. And yet it is still my fiduciary responsibility to make sure they're making smart financial decisions. So I have to make sure that they understand that in the bank's eyes, they may very well be overpaying for this home. It doesn't mean that they're truly overpaying for it, because the value of a home is in the eye of the person who purchases it, right? That's the real value of the home. The bank has a different view of that, right? But in the bank's eyes, they may be overpaying for that. And if that is the case, they have to sort of reckon with that themselves and come around and realize that that's the case. For some people, understanding that, they're like, well, I don't want to overpay. And I'm like, is it overpaying though? If that's the value you find in the property, right? And if they go, yeah, I think it is, I'm like, okay, then it's overpaying, and then we don't move forward that way. But I want to make sure that they understand the difference between an appraised value of the property and the actual value of the property. Because I do believe that the value of our homes is really dictated not by what they've sold for, but what people will buy them for. And appraisals are based on historical data, right? So we know appraisers are looking at homes that have already sold. Sure, they can look at the market, but I'm going to tell you, I don't believe that a ton of them really do. I think that they look at what is sold,
Right.
and they use as comparables, and that's how a value is derived. Now, if your market is going up consistently, I mean, we have one area here where I'm from that the values are going up 12% every year.
What
That
part of
means
Florida is that?
Central Florida.
Central.
So it's in a little area called Horizon West. It's over near Disney World. But that area is going up 12% year over year, which means month over month, historical data is completely a nonsense as those values rise,
Right.
right? So the value of the property is what the buyer is willing to pay for it.
Well, that's what determines value, period. You know, that's what we say in our listing presentation. It's what a ready, willing, and able buyer is willing to pay. You know, so just like you said, it's what it's worth to that buyer. That's what the value is, regardless of what the appraisal says. And a lot of times,
And if
even
they've got the cash and they want to bridge the gap, by all means, I'm happy to write that part of the contract and do that. I just need them to understand that the bank may disagree with me with that being a good idea, but it's up to them. If at the end of the day, they can't picture themselves living in any other house, then it's worth that money. Right?
I'm not really seeing, of course, we're not in the Lexington market. We're kind of in the, I always call it the greater central Kentucky area, more south west of Lexington, but we're not really seeing any appraisal gap clauses in any of our offers, just because it's not needed, you know, because we're not in multiple offer scenarios anymore. So What about everybody else? Have you had to write any offers that included appraisal gaps? Or did you maybe write those types of clauses in a couple years ago and now you're not seeing it? Or have you never seen it? What are some of your thoughts? Anybody?
I don't recall seeing something like that, but again, granted, I've only done 3 sales, so not a whole lot of experience.
Okay. And I agree. I mean, I got started in 2016 and I'd never really seen it until really 2021 is when I personally was starting to see it in negotiation. And that's of course when the market in this area really ramped up and got super competitive. But we aren't seeing it, at least in my area, really anymore. All right, what about repairs? What are some ways, or have you all had to negotiate much on like inspection repairs, or what are your thoughts on that? Are you not seeing that anymore, or have you seen a resurgence of buyers being more picky when it comes to home inspections and asking for more items to be addressed, or asking for further price negotiation in lieu of repairs? What are some of your thoughts?
I'm definitely seeing more repairs requested since COVID. So everybody was choosing option 1 and 2 during COVID, and now people are asking for repairs. And with the new contract, you get that option now. So you either get no repairs or you can ask for repairs. So
Right. So let me ask you, when you all are talking to your clients, whether it be a buyer or a seller, are you kind of preparing them are you kind of planting those seeds of mindset before you get to that inspection step, to let them know, hey, here are some of your options? Or how are you having those conversations to explain the potential negotiation that can be associated with the home inspection step?
with the buyers, definitely, like telling them, you know, the contract's more desirable if you choose option 2. You know, it's more desirable to the sellers because that means that you're not going to ask for any repairs. But I do tell them that now the market's changed and people are asking for repairs. So it's totally up to them. And, you know, if we think we're going to be in a multiple offer situation, then yeah, I usually recommend 2 if they want to put in a good offer, but I'll leave it totally up to them.
Okay. Anybody else have any input?
I'm seeing that it used to be that people only really asked for what I consider like safety and security concerns on a home, right? Or like those big major appliances. And now we're getting to a point where people are asking for weird cosmetic stuff that maybe doesn't matter
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it obviously matters to the buyer. They wouldn't be asking for it, but right, you get that inspection report back and there are sometimes you look at it and you're like, oh, Mr. Inspector, why did you put this in this report? This is unnecessary.
Yes.
But I think this once again also goes back to setting realistic expectations for your buyers. And also having a really good network of allied business partners.
Mhm.
So you know when you're referring an inspector to someone, they're not going to kill your deal.
Yep.
You put a whole bunch of stuff in there that your customer might want fixed. That's more cosmetic stuff, right? So I have the conversation I meet with my vendors. I try to at least biannually. Twice a year, I touch base with them and it's coffee, it's lunch, it's something that I go, hey, I just want to make sure that you're still delivering the same level of service that I'm delivering. We're still on the same page so I can continue to refer you to my customers. And here are the things that are important to me in a transaction. And this is what I advocate for my customers. And I make sure that my vendors are well aware of what that sounds like and looks like. So that way and once again, they're welcome to pick any inspector they choose, right? They don't have to pick mine. They can tell me to pound sand. That's okay. And yet, end of the day, I know that if they do pick one of mine, they're going to A, get the same level of service, and B, they're not getting someone who's going to kill my deal and say, well, this peeling paint could mean there's moisture in the wall.
Mhm.
Or it could mean that there's peeling paint, and let's not speculate, right? So I think that there's ways to do that and ways to have that conversation. And I think it, like I said, it's really important that you set realistic expectations up front for your customers. If you are going to be negotiating those repairs, that, hey, listen, what's a deal breaker to you, Mr. Buyer? Is a deal breaker to you that the floors might need to all be replaced or the AC might need to be completely replaced? Is that a deal breaker? All right, because if it is, then maybe I'm not going to show you a house that I know the AC is over 10 years old. Why would I do that? All right. So once again, really good buyer consults solve a lot of problems here.
Yep, I agree 100%. What are, do you all have any ideas of, or maybe you can share, how do you all work through the inspection report negotiation? You know, what are some things that you can, some tools that you can utilize and ways that you can negotiate repairs? Obviously you can ask for the seller to make the repair if it's needed, but what are some other ways that you can address those issues without flat out just needing them to be fixed? Do you all have any thoughts? So like the first one I would recommend, obviously you can do a price reduction in lieu of repairs. That's a very common option. And a lot of times that's very attractive to the seller because maybe they're crunched for time or they don't want to have to go through hiring contractors and coordinating all that. So a lot of times they're just willing to drop the price by X amount in lieu of repairs. Another idea would be request a home warranty. Let's say that the HVAC is 18 years old, but it's still working, but you know, the inspector said it's probably going to go out. It could go out any day. In lieu of asking the seller to drop the price or to do a whole overhaul on the HVAC, you could request a $600-700 home warranty for them to provide at closing. That's another option. Do you all have any
cash
other
concession
ideas?
at closing works too. So that way
Yes.
you don't have to affect the actual purchase price of the property. And then essentially that can go towards their closing costs and prepaids. That allows the customer to be able to keep the cash in their pocket, to be able to make the repairs that they need immediately and not hope to see those savings over time with a reduced price.
Yep, great idea. Anybody else have input or ideas? I would say, in my experience, and probably your all's as well, when a deal's going to be killed, it's normally because of the home inspection. So if we can have some ideas, and again, goes back to creativity, try to get creative to get through that step, we'll be better prepared in the event that we run into an issue.
And this is also a really great time to remind, that's why it's so important that your sellers actually disclose everything.
Certainly.
Sometimes your sellers will be reluctant to disclose things, even though it's required by law, but you'll see it on their faces when you're having that conversation with them. Make sure it's very, very clear that A, they need to legally disclose material facts that are wrong with their property. And B, beyond the legal part of it, it's just going to save us all so much headache if you just tell everybody up front everything wrong with the house. That way it's not a surprise when it comes back in an inspection report, right?
Right. Well, and I always tell my sellers, that is in their best interest also because it provides a layer of protection for them on down the road. If they are totally transparent and very detailed, not only is that going to be, in my opinion, appealing to a buyer, if I'm a buyer, I'm going to be much more inclined to have interest in a property that has a very detailed seller's disclosure, that's very transparent versus a disclosure that is marked unknown. That is a turnoff to me personally. But on down the road, if there's an issue and the buyer ever tries to come back on the seller claiming that they weren't aware of that issue, the seller can always reference that seller's disclosure that the buyer has to initial off on as evidence. Yes, we did disclose this to you. You did know that this was a previous, pre-existing condition and we'd had issues with this in the past. So I explained to my sellers that gives you an extra layer of liability protection on down the road. So it is not only required by law that you disclose those items, but it also is in your best interest for long-term results. Any other input from anybody? Another options, I've seen people hold money in escrow. I know you said like a price concession at closing, but also hold money in escrow with the title company or closing attorney And then those funds are used on down the road to access for those repairs. You know, maybe your seller doesn't feel comfortable just writing a check to the buyer because they want to be sure that those funds are going to be actually used for the repairs and not for a new couch. So a good alternative and way that you can work through that is hold those funds in escrow with the title attorney. You could probably hold them in escrow with your broker as well, I would think. I've never had to do that, but it's probably an option, I would think. Has anybody ever
I've-
had
I've seen that
situations
done
like
for
that?
roof repairs, particularly, just because they're such a large, like, money repair.
Mhm.
And, you know, you can't get insurance if your roof is bad, right? So we'll put the money in escrow. They'll essentially, a buyer will take on a much higher cost insurance until that roof is replaced, and then they will use those funds that are in escrow to pay for that. And then they can get they can have their roof reassessed and get that lower insurance rate.
Mhm. Okay, any other comments or thoughts on other items within the offer that can be negotiated? Other points of negotiation? Okay, do you all want to take a little short break or do you just want to kind of power through? I don't know how long this is. I think it's probably at least 5 or 6 more pages. We could keep going and get done a little earlier. We can take a quick break and then return. I'm okay if you all are okay to keep going, but I guess you can come and go as you please. Is that okay with everybody? We'll just keep powering through? Okay.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. Ahas, does anybody have any, I know we've kind of been just discussing as we've gone through, any input or experiences that people want to share? Questions? This is a good time to ask anything. Nope. Okay. All right, next step is we're going to go over the 3 P's of negotiation. So the first P is prepare. Preparation is the key to building confidence and ensuring a smooth negotiation process. And I agree with that 120%. That all kind of goes back to communication and being proactive. So what are some, let's talk about if you're working with a buyer, what are some ways that you can prepare before negotiation if you're working with a buyer client? Any input? All right, I'll go first. First thing you can do is explain to the buyer the different elements of the offer, in my opinion, that can be negotiated. So when I'm working with a buyer client, and this is especially true if it's a new buyer that's never bought anything, you know, we have to keep in mind they are going into this completely blind. You know, for us, we do this every day, so it's second nature. But for somebody that's never made an offer on a property, never bought a property, this is going to be like reading Chinese to them. I mean, they're not going to know how to interpret it. So first thing, you want to go over the different elements that can be negotiated. Obviously price, but also share with them, you know, the other elements that make their offer unique. Closing time frame, due diligence time period, their type of financing. And then we really need to prepare them for the different outcomes that are possible. You know, the seller may accept your offer immediately, just as it's written, or they could totally reject it and not want to work with you at all, depending on the terms that you've presented. Or most commonly, they will want to counteroffer. And I feel if we prepare our buyers for that, and we educate them on all of those elements, you know, it's going to make it much more smooth when we're in the midst of that negotiation. Another way that we can be prepared, which hopefully everybody is doing, is we want to have that pre-approval on hand. And really, you should have that form before you even start showing people property, because you don't want to waste your time with somebody that can't get a loan. So make sure you have that pre-approval and that you have a really good relationship with the lender, or have at least touched base with them. I got an offer yesterday on one of my listings, and the lender sent me a voice memo about the particular buyer that had made the offer. I'd never had that happen. I thought that was really impressive. And it was just a little voice memo that he sent me saying, you know, I just wanted to touch base with you. I know, you know, Jane Doe has made an offer on 123 Main Street, and I just want to let you know that I've gotten all of her pay stubs. She's got really strong credit, a good employment history. She is a solid buyer. You know, we shouldn't have any trouble getting this loan to close. You know, that was very impressive to me as a listing agent. And then when I shared that with my sellers, they were very impressed as well, because that gave them good confidence in that buyer. So that's something as a realtor that we can help with our buyers, is make sure that that relationship is good and strong, and you've got good communication with the lender. Another element that we always want to make sure that the buyer understands before they make an offer, and that we have a clear understanding is closing cost. I've had so many buyers that I'll say, well, have you discussed, you know, your closing cost and what you can expect your closing expenses to be with your lender? And they'll say, no, we have no idea. You know, so they need to know that before they make an offer and before you try to negotiate, because you don't want them getting to closing, especially if it's, you know, a first time home buyer that's doing a certain type of loan program where they're very strapped on cash, and then they get surprised that they're going to have $7,500 in closing costs that they have to bring to the closing table unexpectedly. So you need to know that as the realtor before you write that offer, and need to make sure you have that conversation with the buyer. That way there's no surprises, because that could kill the deal. You know, you could get all the way to the CDs issued, and they're like, wait, we spent $7,000, you know, a few days ago, we went out and bought, you know, a new furniture set and paid cash for it. We don't have the funds at closing. And then that would kill the entire deal. So that's another way that you can prepare, is just make sure you have all of your I's dotted and your T's crossed before you even draft the offer for a
One of the
buyer.
things that we typically forget is that a lot of these homes are in homeowners associations, and homeowners
Yep.
associations have additional fees that are going to affect that bottom line for the customer. Not just the monthly fees, but oftentimes things like a capital contribution fee that is happening at the time of closing. Things that are happening like a estoppel fees that are being charged, and all that kind of stuff that is just associated with that. So particularly if your customers are purchasing in an area with newer homes or those well-defined subdivisions, if they do have an HOA, make sure you do your due diligence during that preparation period, that you're not setting them up to break a heart, right? I always tell my customers, I'm not in the business of breaking hearts. So if it takes me a few minutes to put together your offer, please understand it's not because I'm not prioritizing it. It's because I am crossing T's and dotting I's and making sure that this is the right choice for you.
Yep, I agree 100%. Anybody else have input or thoughts? All right, how could you prepare for a seller? Any ideas on preparing the seller for the offer? I think my opinion when we list property is I try to make sure they understand pricing. And obviously you want to have done that before you even list the property. But if they wouldn't list where you told them to, and then they list, let's say 10% higher than where they need to be, or 15% higher, you know, I think it's good to try to have that conversation before you present the offer of, you know, just a reminder, we are priced, you know, above what market value says that this property is worth. So in the event that we get an offer that's lower on the pricing side, you know, just keep that in the back of your mind. Any other input on preparing the seller for an offer? You know, I think it goes back to the same things, you know, make the seller aware of the different elements that they can expect, you know. And I think it's good to always remind your clients, negotiation is a big part of real estate, you know, so they're not offended if they get a lowball offer, and they're not surprised if it's not perfect. You know, it's a conversation that you have when two parties are trying to work together to accomplish the same goal. So preparing them to have realistic expectations in today's market. For example, if you're listing a a lower priced home that's more affordable, more than likely, a lot of the offers, unless you're getting them from investors, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to be seeing more like FHA loans or USDA loans for that type of property, because those are going to be some of your starter homes, and a lot of your starter home buyers are using some of these government programs for their funding. So I think it's good that we prepare our sellers for those types of details of the offer versus them thinking they're going to get an all cash offer. Now, could that happen? Certainly, it'd be great if it did, but from a more realistic standpoint, if you are, in my area, if you're a $200,000 house or lower, more than likely the clientele that you're going to be getting are going to be, new buyers. And a lot of those new buyers go the FHA route because it's lower down payment commitment and more options for them. So preparing your seller on the forefront so they have that expectation and they're not surprised, again, just makes it a much more smooth presentation process for you as the realtor and smoother to negotiate. What are some other ways that you all feel like you can prepare your buyers and your sellers?
I think that we need to lean into using command when presenting multiple offers to our customers. It gives us a really great platform for them to be able to see them in an unbiased way, side by side, and really be able to see all the great things about the offer without getting overwhelmed with all the minutia that are in those contracts. So many times I've seen people who have tried to reinvent the wheel. So they create their own like multiple offer worksheet in like Excel and all of it. Stop it. We have it for you. Just use the tool. I promise you it's there, and I promise you it works really well. It works incredibly well. So, or, I hear people with what I consider a limiting belief of, well, this is what my customer wants. They want to see all the minutia. 99% of the time, that is not the case. They want to know the facts. They want to know the price of the property. They want to know when it's going to close. They want to know how long that inspection period is. They want to know how much is in escrow. They want to know what type of financing it is. This is it. That's all they care about. Right. And it also, when we utilize that tool, it gives us the opportunity to not put ourselves in a position that we are presenting an offer in a way that can violate fair housing. Right. So we want to make sure that our customers maybe aren't looking at someone's name and going, oh, this person must be insert religion, nationality, whatever that might be here. And I don't want to sell to that person. When you utilize something like that multiple offers worksheet, it can be offer 1, offer 2, offer 3. And then we know we are on the up and up across the board. No one's putting ourselves in a bad situation.
Sure. And the good thing about the new Bluegrass Realtors residential sale contract that I like is that all of those details are on the first 2 pages. So our old version, you had to like go through the whole offer to get all those details. You had to go to like page 4 or page 5 to find the closing date. It was scattered. But now with this new contract, it is all the meat and potatoes, so to speak, are on the first 2 pages, which is really nice because you just get to the point quickly. And then the rest of the pages is explaining, all the details. So I think that was a good change that our MLS made and an improvement, but we've not used the command system for presenting offers, but I think you make a lot of great points, and we use command for pretty much everything else. It's a great tool, and that's a great idea, like you said, especially presenting multiples when you're going over an offer. I personally, a lot of times, like last night, I had to review an offer and we just did a conference call because it was later at night and they were in front of a computer. And then we have other clients that maybe are not very tech savvy and they still want to meet in person with a handheld copy. That does still happen in our area quite frequently. So I think you can mold it to whatever works for your client as well to accommodate their schedule and their needs.
I'll tell you, the best thing I ever did for my business is invest in a laptop that has a touch screen. So my laptop can be a tablet as well as a laptop itself. and it
Nice.
has a touch screen. So if they are people who want to see the contract, I still don't have to print it for them. I show up and I can pull it up on my screen and I can flip through it. They can flip through it how they want to in order to look at it. And I know at that point, sitting in front, that they feel comfortable, but I'm not necessarily handing them a document that could have someone's confidential information on it too, right? I do want to make sure I'm holding on to some of that stuff pretty
Mhm.
close to the vest. So I'm happy to go and sit at their kitchen table if they want to go through stuff, but I'm either going to hand them an iPad to look at it, or I'm going to open up my laptop and we're going to flip through it this way. And that way they can feel real confident in making that decision. I think there's a way to still utilize the technology, even with those folks that, that the idea of everything going digital makes them feel uncomfortable. There's a way to still make it personal for them
Yeah,
and yet
certainly.
not put ourselves in a position where we are destroying the rainforest. So I
Any
love
other?
trees.
All right, this next slide just goes over the, some ideas for preparing, steps for preparing. So know your goal, I think that's pretty evident. The goal is to go under contract, right? and get a good, strong offer that everybody feels confident in and move towards closing. Know your client. Different personalities require different types of communication. So, if your client is a very impatient person that, is that type of personality that just wants to get on to the next thing, they're very busy, they don't want you to go through it super thoroughly, then hit the high points and make sure they understand what they need to understand. You may have the other end of the spectrum, somebody that's very detail oriented and wants you to read every word of the offer with them. I try to do that with my clients, and it's all over somebody's face when I'm boring them to death. So just try to be observant. But a lot of times, if you know your client before you begin preparing the offer, you can kind of get ahead of it and make it more smooth. Think ahead, set clear expectations. That goes back to good communication. Be informed. You don't want to be writing an offer on a property that maybe you haven't even shown and you aren't very informed on. You need to know kind of what the comps are in the area, what the history is, what's the PVA value, has it been on the market for 3 days or 300 days? Did it have 2 offers that fell through and it came back on the market? You need to know all of that. Obviously, obey the laws. We want to follow the code of ethics, but also, abide by the fair housing laws. And this is the main one. Know the documents inside and out. I feel like that is so important. Like we have a fiduciary duty to be well informed, and we're dealing with our clients' biggest asset, most of them, their most expensive asset that they will ever own or that they have currently. So we need to know the documentation and be very well versed in it before they sign anything, because it's legally binding once they sign it. And if we're not familiar with what they're signing, why would they have any confidence to sign it with us? So study the documents, go to the classes, Google. This sounds silly, but if there's a word you don't know, it takes no effort to look it up. Google it, see what does that mean? Ask a fellow agent or your broker, or call an attorney and say, please help me understand what this means. A big one that a lot of people overlook is a lot of times the survey clauses in contracts. They just make an assumption that boundary lines are where the seller says they are, or if there's even a plat attached to an offer, that the lines are where the fence is. That is not always accurate, and that can get you in a lot of trouble from an agent perspective as far as being liable. So knowing your documents, our documentation states that it's up to the buyer to have their survey completed before entering, or it's up to them to be comfortable with the boundary lines before entering the offer to purchase. So you need to know that before you write up that offer. That way, if there's any concern over boundary lines of the property, it can be addressed during the negotiation and it doesn't get overlooked. So really educate yourself on the documents, because we are the experts, or we should be the experts. And if they come to us with a question, let's say they're under contract, I'm working with a seller and a tornado comes through and rips half their roof off. They're going to say, well, how does this affect my deal? Well, if I don't know the document, I'm not going to have an answer for them. So again, know the documents inside and out and be able to explain what it means that they're signing. And these are just some points. If you ask purposeful questions, some benefit you get from that. So, asking questions to your client provides you with points that you are going to negotiate on, so you know what's important to them. It gives you insight on where you can have leverage in negotiation, sets clear expectations. It allows you to get to know your client and their goal. If, like we discussed earlier, if a closing time frame is very important to them, you need to know that from the get-go. Helps you learn what will make it a win-win negotiation for both parties. So if you go into negotiation having all of this information, you're going to be much more effective in negotiating. So these are some open-ended questions that have unlimited response options that you can discuss with your clients to be more informed. What additional information should I know? That's a good one. Is there additional details that maybe they haven't told you up to this point that's going to affect their ability to close on a property or their ability to move? You need to know that. Why is it important to close in 30 days? Or is it even important at all to close in 30 days? Do they have more flexibility? How do you feel about that? That goes back to communication. You need to make sure your client's comfortable with the offer before you draft or before you present it. Hey. Oh, I think there's a few people on. Yeah, it's just kind of small. Those are open-ended questions. Closed-ended questions. These are questions that you're going to expect a specific response, either yes or no. Do you have to sell your home by a specific date? That's a pretty hard response. Do you have any other offers? That's very important. If there's another offer on the table and you're representing a buyer, you need to know that, because that changes the whole game and it becomes much more competitive. What is the bottom line price you would consider? Now, that's if you're in, it all depends on who you're asking that question to, I suppose, on how effective that can be. If you are a realtor representing the seller and you ask that question, that gives you some insight on how much negotiating room they will have. If you are representing a buyer and you ask that question, it would be probably the flip side. What is the most that you're willing to give? Where do you not want to go above? It kind of sets some benchmarks that you can work within as far as negotiating. Any input on this or questions? I think there's just 4 people, including myself. There were several other earlier. Oh, it's okay. This is fine. Oh, it's all right. Some what and why questions. What would happen if? That's a good question. Kind of gives you an idea of what to anticipate in the next steps of the negotiation and what is important to you. Helps you gain more information and more insight. We kind of discussed that. All right, we're going to skip this scenario because we've had some good discussion. Any questions over preparing? No? All right, best practices when presenting. First thing, obviously, is call the other agent or communicate with them. Let them know they have an offer. You'd be surprised at how many offers have popped up in my email inbox. I'm like, they didn't even let me know they sent one over. It just showed up. So, what if it went to junk mail? I'd never even know it was there. So, yes, reach out to the other agent. Let them know that you're sending over an offer and give them, that's a great opportunity to really advocate for your buyer. Tell them how much they love the house and how strong of a buyer they are and great relationship you have with the lender, and gives you a really good opportunity to bridge that gap. Pay attention to nonverbal clues like pauses and voice qualities. That gives you some insight on reaction and will help you gauge kind of how the news is setting in per se. And then keep quiet once you present an offer. Sometimes we talk too much. I'm guilty of that. a lot of times it's good to just be quiet and let your client talk and respond and react. And then you can answer questions as needed. Listen carefully to what is important to the other party. You know, those will be indicators on, you know, what needs to be done and how you can further negotiate more effectively. Stay calm and relaxed. That can be very difficult, especially if you get emotionally wrapped up, and we try not to get offended in this business. And sometimes realtors are worse at it than clients, but our clients are really going to react. They're going to watch how we're reacting, and then they're going to feed off of that. So if we're calm and relaxed and business minded, instead of getting all worked up and emotional and angry or offended, they're going to mimic how you act. So it's always best to just stay calm and relaxed. At the end of the day, this is a business transaction and we're all working after the same goal. So you just have to keep your mindset on that. That's what we're working towards, is getting this property sold. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, that will enable you to stay calm and not let your emotions get the best of you. Focus on the customer's needs. You know, that is our number one duty, is to take care of our clients. So we want to focus on their needs and make sure that the terms of the offer line up with those needs, and then give your offer the best chance. You know, you always want to put your best foot forward. So draft that offer in a manner that it's going to look as attractive as possible to the other party. And a lot of that comes from the preparation, you know, just like I was saying, having that pre-approval ready, being able to answer questions on timeframes. You know, if you have a home sale contingency, being proactive and having all of the details lined up to move forward and get the ball rolling. Any questions? No?
I would say though, when it comes, the calling the other agent should actually come during the preparing piece, not really as well as the presenting piece, of course. But
Mhm.
I really feel like that should be added in prepare. You do
Sure.
need to call them and just say, hey, you can be expecting an offer. I'm drafting it right now. What's important to your customer? How do I make sure this is a win-win for everyone? They really love this home. We want to get this across the finish line. What does this look like? Right. I think if we don't call them until we go, hey, there's an offer in your inbox, we've missed a real opportunity to set our buyers up for success.
I agree. And also, if you contact them, let's say right after the showing, then you're going to know if there's other interest in the property. Is there a chance you're going to be in a competitive position? And if so, you can use that knowledge to better prepare your client, your buyer, when you're drafting the offer. You know, maybe you need to put an escalation clause on with your offer to be sure that you're in a better position. Or maybe you need to advise your buyer that, hey, there's not going to be as much negotiating room as we thought there was going to potentially be, because they've had a lot of interest here lately, a lot of second showings, you know, et cetera. So I agree. It's better to reach out to the other agent earlier on if there is interest. These are just some other tips for positioning when you're within the negotiation step. Acknowledge and affirm common ground. Ask what and how questions. Know that positioning is a process, and know when to walk away. You know, common ground would be acknowledging the terms that you agree upon. You know, so maybe it's not price, maybe it's not due diligence time period, but maybe you're both agreeable upon the closing time frame. So you have that in common. And maybe you're agreeable on maybe the buyer does not have a house they have to sell, so they're ready and willing to go. You know, that is common ground. Or you're agreeable to how much down the earnest money amount is. That could be common ground. That kind of starts off the negotiation and the discussions with your clients on a positive note, you know, painting the offer in a positive manner versus focusing on where they're not seeing eye to eye. Ask what and how questions. You know, again, it's just goes back to good communication and getting your client talking. A good example is, I had a client, I've got some clients that have a house for sale and they got an offer and they have some peeling paint around their windows. It's an older house. And initially they had told me, we're not going to make any repairs if it's required by an appraisal. We just really don't want to do that type of work. Well, they're in a situation where they need to sell their house. It's non-negotiable. So they got an offer that was an FHA loan. And we all know that with FHA loans, they're going to flag that peeling paint and make that be repaired upon an appraisal. And I had that conversation with them and they said, well, what all does that entail? Do we have to replace the windows? And I said, no, certainly not. It would just require you flaking off the paint that's peeling and repainting. I said, it's definitely something that you all could even do yourselves. Like most of the time they don't require it to be, a professional painter that does it. You can do it on your own. And just having that additional knowledge and them asking questions, got them to a point of, okay, we would be willing to entertain this offer, knowing that condition may be something we have to work through. So it kind of goes back to that communication. Know the positioning is a process and knowing when to walk away. I guess that can be applicable as walking away from negotiation, when you're just not really getting anywhere. Maybe you've gone back and forth and just keep hitting a wall and it just can't be worked through. There are those scenarios, unfortunately, that we do everything we can and we just can't come to terms. Sometimes when a client walks away, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So if they have to go through that pain that Crystal was talking about earlier, sometimes that encourages them to make a change moving forward. So sometimes that can work to your benefit from a real estate perspective if it's needed. But I always try to, if you get an offer, always try to negotiate through whatever the hurdles are to get towards that closing date and work towards that goal. Any questions on this or input? Okay. Negotiation tips. All right, these are just some tips for negotiating. Obviously, be professional. It's easy to let your guard down because I know sometimes we become buddies with our clients. They become kind of like a friend, but you always have to remember you are the professional. So they've hired you because you are a professional realtor. So even though it would be easy to not be professional if you've developed a really high level of comfort with your client, you always need to set those boundaries. And that includes, your reaction to offers, your reaction to feedback, to homes. You are the professional. So act like it ultimately. And when you're negotiating with another agent, you need to be professional and keep that in mind because more than likely you're going to have to work with that person again, hopefully, if you both have long careers. So if you go off the cuff and you're unprofessional or you don't respond to inquiries or you are sloppy with how you write up your offers and aren't helpful in trying to get the deal done, that will follow you. So always try to be the best that you can be if you want to have a long career in this industry. Keep your goal in mind. Always have your goal as at the forefront of something that you're working towards. That way, when you do hit those hurdles, if you focus on that goal and reaching that goal, that will give you that much more motivation to work through problems. And the problems will come. I mean, I wish every real estate deal was easy peasy, but there will be things that happen out of the blue that you'll be like, well, I never saw this coming, a lien on a property or, I had a lady submit an offer on one of my listings the other day, a realtor, a nice realtor. And she called me before we accepted it. The sellers were going to accept it. And she called me back. She said, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to retract our offer. My buyers got a raise at work. And because they got their raise today, they no longer qualify for their welcome home funds because they make too much money. And they were gonna use, yes, they were gonna use their welcome home funds for their down payment and their closing cost. And because they got that raise, they no longer could qualify. I'd never heard of that happening. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but she, hated it. She was very professional and she hated it for her clients and for my sellers. But that kind of stuff happens. So what do? Just throw your hands up in the air and say, dang, that's no good. No, you work through it. And that's exactly what she told me that they were going to do. They were going to look at other options and try to see how they could work through this hurdle. That was unexpected, to still keep working towards her finding her clients a home and, trying to get them to the closing table. So she was still goal oriented, and willing to work through those issues. But that stuff will happen. People will get divorced in the middle of selling a property when you have it under contract. I mean, people pass away. It happens. Accidents happen. I had a listing one time that caught on fire. Thankfully it was a vacant listing. It happens, but you have to keep the goal in mind. And if you do that, then that gives you more energy to be able to work through the hard stuff. Pay attention to your communication and tone with anyone involved in the transaction. We all work long hours some days, and when we get a text at 9 o'clock that something has gone sour, it's easy to want to snap. I've been there myself. I get it. But you have to, your tone and the way that you communicate, especially if you're communicating over text, which it's so much better if you pick up the phone and call, because you cannot judge somebody's attitude through text. It can be interpreted in so many different ways. So just make sure you try to take a deep breath, count to 10, and be kind, because
I think we all succeed
Yeah.
more when we remember to keep our emotions in between the lines, right? But also cut each other some grace, right?
Yes.
We are not sending people to the moon, folks. Yes, this is the most expensive transaction or biggest transaction of most people's lives, and yet we are not curing cancer.
Right.
There are very few deadlines that we can affect in any way, shape, or form in the middle of the night.
Oh,
Right?
certainly.
So if another realtor reaches out to you and their hair is on fire and it's 10 o'clock at night and, oh, we've got to get this done right now, unless that deadline is midnight, you don't. Okay. And I think it's really important that we just remember to stay calm ourselves and give each other grace, and just simply say to the person, I understand this is a big deal. We will address this in the morning. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. And I hope you have a great night.
Mhm.
It's actually okay to not drop your life every single time something happens in a real estate transaction.
Yeah.
This is why agents in their first couple years burn out,
Yep. I agree
because
100%.
they feel like they have to be on all the time. Very few things that we can affect in the middle of the night. Okay. So you don't have to be on all the time. It's okay to wait a few minutes to get back with someone if you're at your kid's dance recital. It's not going to kill anything. All right. It's going to be all right. It's going to be okay too if, when you're presenting that offer, you present it and then somebody reaches back out to you and you don't answer the phone right in that second. Like I've listened to agents in the bathroom answering the phone while they are doing their business. Guys, you can wait till you're done and give them a call back. It's okay.
Right.
Okay to do that. So I think we have to, like I said, just give each other a little grace. Understand if someone doesn't answer the phone immediately, it's not any sign that they don't respect you. They could be in the middle of something personal. And as long as we are within our deadlines, it is okay.
Mhm. And I think that personally, talking about deadlines, keep that in mind too when you're writing an offer. I understand that in the past couple of years where it's been so competitive, you want a quick answer because you don't want somebody to get in front of you if you're representing a buyer. But I personally feel like it's very disrespectful to the seller and to the listing agent when you put a 4-hour response timeline. When it's at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday, when people are probably at work or have other things going on. So
24 hours is like
Yes.
respectful.
I think 24 hours is should be this unspoken standard, you know, and that's what we try to do. Again, I understand it's a slippery slope, because if you know there's been other showings and there may be other interest, you have that concern and you don't want somebody to slip in front of you. But here's the reality. If you submit an offer and the seller is going to be in the driver's seat, you know, yes, they know that you could walk away and go somewhere else, but is your buyer do they really want the house if they're not willing to wait a few more hours for the seller to respond? You know, I mean,
You guide that conversation.
you
with
definitely
the
got
agent.
it.
You can say it's a respectful amount of time to give them 24 hours to think about it.
Yes.
This is a big decision for them as well. It's not
And
just you.
a lot of sellers do not respond well to that pressure. You know, that starts that negotiation on a very
Yeah.
bad tone, because
Yeah, you
feel
definitely
like
gotta
they're-
set the tone early, and that is not
Yeah.
a good one to set.
no, it isn't, because they feel cornered. They feel like they're being pressured, and that just does not start off on the right foot. So be conscious of that when you are drafting an offer and putting those response deadlines, because, you know, a lot of times that quick, let me know something in 4 hours does not settle well with the seller or with the listing agent. And like you said, we have to give each other grace. You know, I mean, we all have lives too.
Yeah.
And it is a quick way to get burnt out when you're on your phone 24/7. I have really this year enjoyed the do not disturb setting on my phone. I try to put the do not disturb on like at 8 o'clock. Now, if I know that something's going on and I need to be reachable, that's a little bit different. But you know, if somebody submits an offer after 8 o'clock, they can wait until the next day to get a response. I mean, that's just the
Mine
fact.
goes on at 8:30. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
understand that completely.
it's
It's not that I
really
don't care about
helped.
you all. I do love you all immensely.
Yeah.
And yet, between work and family and all of those things, if I don't have like an hour and a half to like zone out at the end of the night,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm no good to anyone anyway.
Exactly.
Right? So we have to
Yep.
remember when we do something like that, like putting our do not disturb on, it's not being selfish. We're actually giving our customers the best version of ourselves the next day. And we
Yeah.
have to remind ourselves that that's really what we're doing, because that guilt can set in of, well, what if someone tries to reach out to me, right? That guilt,
Mhm.
that anxiety of let it go. I
Yeah.
promise you.
It can always wait. I mean,
It will-
that's just
If there's an emergency, they need to call the police.
right.
Or the fire department.
Right.
You don't need me at 9 o'clock at night.
Right. Exactly.
Well, yeah, like I had a customer once that there was a water main break in the house. I had the listing. Okay. Water main break in the house. The neighbor caught it. The neighbor reached out to me. It was in the middle of the night. They saw the water coming out from underneath the garage door. Right.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So panic situation. Neighbor calls me because my name is on the sign out front. My phone number is. It's after 8 o'clock, 8:30 at night. I do not answer the phone because my do not disturb is on. My customer's upset. How come you didn't answer the phone? And I explained to them, it's after 8:30 at night. If this is happening, I'm not the right person to call anyway. I can't
Right.
stop the water. Like I'm not a plumber. I am not the appropriate person to be talking to anyway about this. The appropriate person is the owner of the home, or turning off the water completely to the house,
Mhm.
or calling the city if it's a water main break. Like, those are
Right.
the appropriate courses of action. But calling me and then throwing your hands up in the air was not the right way to handle it either.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, some people could say that's a prime example of why you should have your phone on constantly. And I go, once again, I'm not a plumber. So it's not actually.
No. You know, everybody, all other professionals turn off. You know, your doctors, your lawyers, everybody has to turn off at some point. So our industry is no different. And I think that's why so many realtors get burnt out early, is because you're constantly accessible, and that wears on you, you know?
It does.
And we're not only trying to negotiate their deals, but we're also trying to help them with their, you know, we are kind of the outlet where they vent their other problems, because yeah. Therapist, yes. And you want to be there, but you have to set some boundaries for yourself too. And that
We can't be everything to everybody all the time. And it's just
No.
not possible. It's just like when you get on an airplane and they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help others. That time when you do turn that do not disturb on, it's up to you when that happens. But I recommend that you figure out what time that is for you. and understand that that is your oxygen mask time and protect it as much as you protect your lead generation time or
Mhm.
whatever that might be. It's just as important.
Yeah, I
It's also
agree.
important to let your clients know, I'm not going to answer my phone past 8 o'clock. That's
Oh, yeah.
just my time.
Sure.
And they appreciate that, because guess what? They don't call you after 8 o'clock if you say to them,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna answer my phone, and then you don't answer your
Right,
phone.
right.
I have it in writing in my listing presentation and my buyer presentation. It is in writing and it is handed to them. They know what those hours are. So when I do get attitude from them, or if I get attitude from them down the road, I can go, remember when I talked to you about this when we first met? Right?
Yeah.
I get to sleep crazy. Like I had a customer, I woke up this morning and I had a text message from her at 8:37 last night, which means 7 minutes after I turned on my do not disturb, she reached out to me. Guess what? I texted her back this morning at 8:30 and she was like completely fine with it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
sure.
There was no issues. And I didn't apologize either that I didn't answer because once again, we teach people how to treat us. So if we
Mhm.
start apologizing because we set a boundary, they're
Right.
going to know that they've got the power to push that boundary.
Mhm.
I'm not ashamed that it took some time for myself last night after 8:30 at night.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. Um, okay, some other negotiation tips: continually refer to your client's motivation when speaking with them. Remind them why they are selling or why they are making an offer. And I think it's good to remind them of their goal. Sometimes that encourages them to be willing to negotiate further versus digging their heels in the ground. Don't reveal too much. Listen more than talk. Keep your client's motivation close to your chest. So yeah, we have to be kind of careful what we reveal to the other agent when we are negotiating with them. For one, it's illegal, I guess is the best way to word it, if we disclose too much, due to our fiduciary duties. We don't want to, if the sellers don't want us to disclose that they're getting a divorce and that's why they're selling, we don't need to disclose that. Or if the buyer doesn't want us to disclose that, they just took a new job and they've got to be in this city within 15 days, we don't need to disclose that either, because that information could give the other side an advantage in negotiating. So it is good to listen more and process before you speak. Don't be attached to the outcome. I think sometimes we take it really personally when an offer doesn't work out or we don't have the results that we had hoped for. And really that doesn't do anybody any good. We need to just kind of get back up, brush ourselves off, and keep working towards the goal. Because if we aren't able to negotiate a deal out with house number one or buyer number one, there will be a house number two or a buyer number two if we continue to work towards that and through that. So if you beat yourself up too much because you couldn't get, the deal negotiated, or if you pout about it or, get too wrapped up in it, you're only wasting time versus you could go back to the drawing board and start the search again, or, identify, why did this offer not work out? What could we not work through? And then that will better prepare you for the next offer or the next property that you look at, to help you better position next time you're in that same negotiating position. All right. Is that it?
Mhm.
Okay, well, we are finished. Thank you all for tuning in and joining us. I've never taught one of these classes, so I hope I did everything okay. And I enjoyed the conversation and the input. I think it's always beneficial to kind of have those conversations and get
You did a great job.
ideas. Thank you. And Beth, nice putting a face with a name finally. I wasn't able to come to the get together at the office, so good to meet and talk with you, and good luck to everybody this year. I feel like it's going to be a good real estate year. I'm seeing good trends in my area as far as buyer activity, and
Coming out of the woodwork.
yeah, it really is crazy. It's
Mhm.
kind of like people have come to terms and accepted the new interest rate amount and accepted kind of the cost of life, and they've they're kind of like, okay, if we want to own a home, we're just gonna have to bite the bullet and do it. And,
We got 3 transactions in the last month, so it's doable. You just
Yeah.
gotta, on the pavement.
I agree 100%. So, well, good luck to everybody. I do not know how to turn this off, but you all have a good day. Good speaking with you all.
Bye.
Bye. I'm not very Zoom.
Oh, you're good.
I have to do it for some other meetings that I'm on, like groups that I'm a member of, but
Oh,
I'm never the facilitator.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? I'm always just attending.